Hi folks, I'm Craig Taylor, and as always a huge thanks for joining me here on my YouTube channel, the Bushcraft Padawan. Regulars to my channel will know that during 2017 I made a commitment to spend at least one night out every month for the entire year, and I did that. You'll also know that at the beginning of 2018, this year, I said I wanted to spend a minimum of one full day out in the woods every month. This is the month of June, so by my reckoning I'm about halfway through the year now. So I've come out into the woods today at the end of June. You'll also know that if you're a regular viewer that when I come out into the woods, be it for an overnighter or an all-dayer, I like to come out with a plan. I like to come out with 3, 4, 5 things that I want to practice, try for the first time, refine, have a go at. And I always try and weave into those days out and those overnighters some tree and plant identification to fit in with the tree and plant ID masterclass that I'm undertaking. There's a playlist for those videos up here. This month's a little different. Instead of weaving the tree and plant ID in, that's all I want to do today. So quite simple today. All I want to do today while I'm out in the woods is to focus on some tree and plant identification. I've set myself an arbitrary target of a minimum of 10 species of trees and or plants to be able to identify. I've kind of set myself a target of being able to 95% identify them just by sight. I do have some things to help me if I need if I need some confirmation, and those things are, let me just duck out of view. I've brought along the course notes for the year-long tree and plant identification masterclass, so I will be referring to those. The reason I've brought these out, in addition to these other resources, is that these contain some suggestions and ideas about how these trees and plants, assuming I see them today, can be used for bushcraft purposes. So there's a very heavy slant towards bushcraft use. I've also brought out with me the Collins Complete Guide to British Trees. This has become something of my ID Bible, if I'm honest, over the past 18 months. Great for ID, doesn't give you a damn clue about how they might be used though for bushcraft purposes. That's what my green folder's for. I've also brought out the Collins Pocket Guide to Trees, and I've also brought out the Collins Gem Pocket Guide to Wildflowers as well. Again, neither of these really give you an indication as to how they might be used for bushcraft purposes. That's what the green folder is for. So I'm going to try and identify 10 tree and or plant species, 95%-ish by eye, by recollection, by applying what I've learnt so far, and then unless I am 100% certain, I'm going to dive into the books and the manuals and the guides and the ID guides to get that, hopefully finish off that final 5%. There's one thing I want to say though before this introduction ends and we move on. This is not, despite what it sounds like, this is not a tree and plant identification video. I am not teaching you what these things are because I'm a learner myself. Some of these things that I identify, I may be absolutely wrong. I may be dangerously wrong. Some of these things I may be in the right ballpark. I might have the right family but the wrong species. There may even be an occasion where I'm actually right in this video and that what I'm talking about is what you see on screen. But I just want to caveat once again, this is not a tree and plant identification video. I am very open and accept that I will get things wrong, both today, yesterday and tomorrow when it comes to this subject. This is just an opportunity for me to get out, spend absolute focused time just looking at tree and plant ID, and I thought I would bring you along for the ride as well. But please don't treat it as a tree and plant ID video. If I've got things wrong, and you think you know what it is, do let me know in the comments below. I'm always open to feedback, but please don't slate me from it. I am still learning this very in-depth subject. So why don't we get cracking? Why don't we start in these woods behind me and see what we can find? Well, I've just said I'm going to wander into the woods behind me, and actually I switched the camera off, started to pack up, looked up there, Actually, I'm stood underneath a great example right now, so perhaps I should look up as well as out into the sides for the rest of today. So I am stood underneath what I believe to be an ash tree, or Fraxinus excelsior. Now, as soon as I looked at it, I was pretty sure it was an ash tree. Something told me it was a Fraxinus excelsior, and then something spooky happened. I reached down to grab the closest ID book to me, this one, picked it up, and I'm not joking, you're going to think I'm making this up, but it fell open at this page. Now, how spooky is that? It fell open at the page about ash, Fraxinus excelsior. If that works for the rest of today, I'm going to go and put a lottery ticket on for this weekend. Quite spooky. So I've consulted the book. I was sure it was an ash, a Fraxinus excelsior. I've consulted the book. It is. What tells me that it's an ash? Well, let's take a slightly closer look, shall we? So if we look at the leaf stem on this ash, the ID book suggests that it has 3 to 7 pairs of pinnate-shaped leaves with a terminal leaf at the end. This is 1 pair, 2 pair, 3 pairs, 4 pairs. There's the terminal leaf at the end there, so it fits in with that. It also talks about the seeds. Let me just take a few of these off. It also talks about these seeds. Now, I think they're sometimes called, they're definitely called ash keys. They also have another name for them. I want to say Simone or Samoa or something like that. I'm probably getting that wrong. I know it's in the ID book, but I'm not going to cheat. I'm not going to go over there and re-edit this part of the video. I can't quite remember what they're also known as. I want to say Ramones or Simones or Samoas or something like that, but I know them immediately as ash keys. So there's another good identifying feature as well. And you know what? Whilst I've been talking, I've glanced up and there's something else that I've noticed. So let's take a look at that. So there are 2 things in this shot here that helps to identify, or helps me to identify. Let's not go for the obvious one first, but if you look at the surface of the bark here, it's absolutely covered in lichen. And whilst you can only see what you can see on screen, I'm looking at the entire tree. It's a very mature tree, it's a very old tree, and it is covered in lichen, and that's often an indicator of an ash tree. And there, just above centre of the shot there, it's blowing around in the breeze slightly, but you can see on there a King Alfred's cakes or a cramp balls. Also, I believe the scientific name is Daldinium concentrica. You can see that. I think it's a fungi. I know people get precious about these things, but it's some sort of fungi or growth that's on there, and I'm hoping to discover more of those as we wander through the woods today, because they can be very useful for firelighting. So another ID feature, Daldinium concentrica don't just grow on ash trees. I believe they also grow, or they can grow on beech trees as well. But clearly when you take that visible fungi into account, you take into account the leaf structure, the structure of the leaf stem, and the keys, the seeds, the ash keys as well. I'm pretty certain that what I'm looking at here is an ash tree of Fraxinus excelsior. And now find myself stood in front of what I believe is a hawthorn tree or a shrub or a bush. It depends what book you read, I suppose. It is a hawthorn. I've gone and identified it using a number of books, but this is the one I've got in my hand at the moment. Now, I must admit, I wasn't sure what the scientific name for this, and apparently it's Crataegus monogyna or Crataegus monogyna. Now, I vaguely recall from the tree and plant ID class the monogyna part, and I'm either getting this very right or very wrong, but the monogyna part is something to do with single sex, I think. So the male and female seeds, I'm probably getting this very wrong, are all on the same tree. Let's move on, because I'm not as confident about that part of it, but the monogyna, the monogyna, however it's pronounced, that does ring a bell with me, something to do with how the tree breeds and the male and female being on the same tree. I'm looking at the leaves now, and the ID book suggests that there'll be 3 to 4 pairs of deeply lobed leaves, which match up exactly with what I'm looking at. They also suggest that on the back of the leaves, where all of the veins kind of merge. I think that's called the axis, the vein axis, that there's often some white, fine, downy hairs to be seen, but I can't see them on this particular leaf or any of the other leaves. Maybe it's the wrong time of the year for those to be as prominent. One of the things that I did struggle with finding was the actual thorn. Quite bizarrely, I really had to look for any thorns, and in the end I had to manically grab handfuls of branches in order to feel the thorns and then bring my attention to them. But I believe, no, I thought it was the piece that was above me. Let's go look for a thorn. Just there. This is much more difficult than it looks. Hopefully you can see there, roughly in the centre. There we go. You can see against my fingernail there. There's the thorn. I must admit, I thought this would have been much easier to see the thorns. You know, it's Hawthorn. You'd think they'd have been much more prominent, but I really had to kind of hunt around to actually find them. There's something else that I noticed with this particular specimen that I'm looking at. Most of the time when I see a hawthorn in the park where I normally walk the dog in the morning after the school run, they're quite small specimens. You could easily call them a shrub or a large bush. But if you actually look at this specimen here that we've been looking at over the last few minutes, it's pretty damn tall. It's pretty expansive. I mean, just look at all of this that you're seeing here, with a few exceptions of things that may be growing on it, is all that particular hawthorn specimen. So quite a large specimen, if allowed to grow, I guess. Quite a large specimen if it's in the right conditions. Much larger than the examples that I normally see in the park where I walk. So I'm fairly certain that this is indeed a hawthorn, and that its scientific name is Crataegus monogyna or monogyna. Fingers crossed. From a bushcraft usage perspective, I believe, and I've never tried this for myself, but I believe that the fruits from this, the haws, they can be crushed and processed in a certain way to make foodstuffs later in the year. There's none on this tree at the moment, so either they're not here yet or I've already missed them, but I believe at a certain point of the year, I think autumn time, you can take the berries, the seeds from it, process them in a certain way. I want to say that you can make something called fruit leathers with them, but I'm not 100% certain. So remember, this is not a how-to video, kids, okay? This is just Craig learning out loud, either making a right arse of himself or showing what a genius he is. I suspect I know which of the two it's coming across as, but I think you can use the fruits from these to make some form of food stuff later on in the year. Never done it myself though, perhaps something for me to consider as the months move on. I was just about to walk away from that hawthorn tree. I felt something brush against my arm, looked down, and I can see an old firm favourite from many of our school days, I'm sure, Cleavers or Sticky Willy. Quite a sticky texture to it due to the fine hairs, not needle-like, not like a nettle, just these fine hairs that tend to grip onto clothing. I remember throwing them on my friends' back of their jumpers and coats on the way home from school, and they'd stick there in massive clumps. Goes by many names, cleavers, hook grass, velcro grass, sticky willy, sticky weed. Scientific name is Gallium aperine. I did cheat, I went and looked in the guidebook in my field notes to look that up. In terms of bushcraft uses, you can eat it, it's edible, although it's best to be steamed or blanched beforehand, as you can imagine, because it's got quite a hairy fibrous texture that makes it stick to clothing. And I've also believe I've seen or watched people use it when it's dead and very dry, gather it up into a bundle and use it as a bird's nest for helping to initiate a fire. So Gallium aperine, goosegrass, sticky willies, cleavers, whatever you want to call it. An old school favourite. Here I am sat very tentatively and at a slight distance from what I believe are stinging nettles or common nettles. Scientific name Urtica dioicea or Urtica dioicea. I remember that one from memory. Interesting with a stinging nettle is that there is a very similar looking plant called a white dead nettle that isn't actually a nettle and that doesn't sting. But from what I've been able to determine, they look in many respects very similar. So an interesting exercise here. Most of the time I identify things from look. Sometimes I can identify things from a smell. But of course we have another sense, which is the sense of touch. So I just came along, grabbed a handful of these, they stung me, voila, it's a stinging nettle and not a white dead nettle, which isn't a nettle. So don't forget the power of touch when it comes to identifying things. Leaves on these are arranged in opposite pairs on the stem, and another good identification feature is that the stem itself, the central stem, is relatively square in construction. And if you join me now, I'm just going to tickle one of the stems with my knife, and hopefully if we look down from above we'll be able to see that there is that square, relatively square construction to the stem as opposed to a circular construction. So there we have another species ticked off, stinging nettle or common nettle, or the scientific name Urtica dioicea or Urtica dioicea. I'm not sure whether it's a S sound or a K sound, but another one ticked off. From a bushcraft perspective, you can, it's edible. You clearly need to do something to stop you stinging yourself in the mouth. So in the past I've turned this into a tea, I've turned it into a soup, and I've also frazzled the leaves very briefly over a flame to burn off those actual hairs, those fibres that sting you, and you can turn them almost into kind of a crispy leaf because you've had the stinging elements removed over an open flame. I believe I'm now stood in front of an elder tree, or Zambucus nigra. I didn't cheat, I did know that scientific name. One of the ID features that I use to identify this is to just look at the bark on the main trunk, and some of the secondary branches as well. The word elder is a derivative of the word old, and for me, no matter how young this tree actually is, it always looks old. The branches, the bark, it always looks craggy, it always looks lived in, it always looks like a leathery old face of, you might imagine, of a film type old character where they're very rugged, their face is very craggy. I'm not doing myself any favours here, am I? But it just looks old, even if it's a fairly young tree. So elder, old, that's one of the features that I use. It also has, and I snapped off a piece of dead twig here. You may notice in the middle of that there's kind of a white section, and that's a pith that runs right through the branches, and it's quite powder-like. You can scrape that out very easily with just your finger. It almost flakes away. So that's another ID feature that I use. I've also taken a look at the flowers that are spreading on this, and they have quite a wide base. The bulb of it's not the right word, the bulb, but the spread of these tiny delicate flowers is quite wide, but it's made up of lots of very small flowers. And if you look there, if you can try and just pick out one of those flowers, you'll notice it's kind of got 3 to 5 petals, very small, very delicate. You have to get really up close to be able to see those, but that's another recognition feature as well. From a bushcraft use perspective, I believe that you can also use the berries from this to make a foodstuff. Now you've got me thinking, is it this that you can make the fruit leathers with, or was it the hawthorn down there that I mentioned? One of them is probably deadly, isn't it? One of them is probably going to kill you. So remember, kids, this is not a how-to video, this is just me learning out loud. But I'm 50% certain now that you can use the fruits from this as a foodstuff. What I am more definitive about is that many of the secondary branches on this grow upright, vertical, and are very straight. They're almost ramrod straight, and with a little bit of processing and luck, you can fashion those into good hand drill, into good hand drills to enable you to start fire by friction. So I'm fairly certain I'm standing in front of an elder tree, Zambucus nigra. That's 5 down. I believe I'm now standing in front of a sweet chestnut tree, or Castanea sativa. I did know that one. I recall back in the autumn of last year, I'll link to the video up here, I actually went on a course all about the sweet chestnut tree and learnt that one of the things that it used to be, and possibly still is used to make, are castanets, Castanea sativa. Key recognition feature for me with this tree that always stops me in my tracks, depending on the time of the year, is the shape of the leaf and the size of the leaf. Just look at the size of that leaf. It's bigger than my head. Put it behind my hand. It's twice the size of my hand length. It's got very, very prominent toothed margins, very deeply lobed toothed margins along the edge. Just a very prominent leaf. When you see it, it kind of dwarfs everything else around it in terms of the size of the leaf. Clearly at certain times of the year as well, it can also produce chestnuts, so you get that green spiky husk, the shell around the chestnut itself. That can be a useful ID feature. And of course, depending if they've already dropped, if you see them on the ground, the chances are, unless the squirrels have moved them, that if there's a mass of them, the tree you're standing under is also probably a sweet chestnut tree as well. Bushcraft uses, wow, again, if you look back at this video up here, you'll see lots of uses, but the ones that spring to mind immediately, used a lot for green woodworking, and I know myself that I've used it for spoon carving, and I've also used it back on the elementary bushcraft course with Frontier Bushcraft. I believe we also used it to take the inner bark from that and process that into cordage. So personally, I've got quite a bit of experience of using this particular tree behind me for bushcraft purposes. Keep an eye out for those massive leaves. Just taking the weight off my feet on this downed piece of ash tree. How do I know it's an ash tree, I hear you cry? Because trust me, it is very old. There's nothing obvious left living on it anymore. It's crumbly, it's flaky, I can pull chunks of it apart in my hand. It's certainly beyond the skill set of me to be able to absolutely determine what it is. There's a piece that I've just pulled off whilst I've been absent-mindedly talking to you. What makes me think that it's an ash tree? Well, earlier on in the video, you may recall me focusing quite high up in the tree, and I said that I was able to identify a Daldinium concentrica fungus. I think it's a fungus, otherwise known as King Alfred cakes or cramp balls. They grow predominantly, from my perspective or from my knowledge, they grow predominantly on ash trees and beech trees. I haven't seen any beech trees in these woods, and I've been walking around them for a few years. I've never seen any. It's predominantly ash. And the reason it makes me think that this is an ash tree that I'm sitting on is, well, just take a look underneath the tree and take a look at those fallen branches over there, and you'll see a whole colony of Daldinium concentrica, King Alfred's cakes, cramp balls growing on it. So I'm cheating a little bit here. It's not the tree I'm identifying, although I think it used to be an ash tree. I've already identified that. It's actually the fact that I'm able to get some hands-on some Daldinium concentrica. So I'm cheating a little. I did say at the beginning of the video, trees and plants. Well, I'm going to throw in a fungus as well, just to mix things up a little. From a bushcraft use perspective, the only thing that I'm aware they can be used for is as a coal, as an ember. You can strike a ferro rod onto them, that will catch onto the fungus surface itself, assuming it's in the right condition, and that will burn for quite some time. I've walked around in these very woods a few months ago. I was being bitten to death by mozzies. I'd forgotten to put mozzie rep on. In the end, I got several of those, dropped a spark onto them, made a very, very simplistic tong out of a few sticks, and just carried that round with me, wafting it around, and wasn't bitten for the rest of my time in the woods. So quite good for insect repellents, mosquito repellent in particular, in terms of the smoke perspective, but also good from a fire starting perspective as well. I'm stood in front of a fairly easy one at the moment. A holly tree, Ilex aquifolium. I've cheated, I did not know what the scientific name for holly was, so I looked it up, but I did know that it was a holly tree because it's a holly tree. They're quite easy to determine, to distinguish. What is interesting about these, I didn't realise until I undertook the tree and plant course, was that whilst we recognise them for the spikiness of the, let me just take one, whilst we recognise them for the spikiness of their leaves and those little spikes and thorns that are on the end of each of the lobes of the leaves and the glossy sheen, what I did find interesting was that in bigger trees, taller trees, you may well find that higher up the leaves are nowhere near as spiky as this and are much more rounded. And the reason that they are spiky closer to the ground is against predators, is against things that will eat the leaves and degrade the tree. Higher up, there's much less likelihood of that happening. Therefore, the tree, the shrub, doesn't have to have that natural defence. So that was quite interesting. And of course, come there later on in the year, there are the prominent red berries to help identify it as well. I'm pretty sure this does have some bushcraft purposes. I seem to recall, and I could be misremembering here, but I seem to recall on the woodcrafter course that I undertook, linked to it up here, that we went and felled a limb of a holly tree or a smaller tree at some point during the early stages of the course. But I could be completely misremembering there, so don't quote me. But I can't remember off the top of my head if there are any bushcraft purposes behind a holly tree. I'm sure there are. I'm sure you can burn dead standing Hollywood, as you can with most trees. Most trees, not all, some may be toxic, but there's nothing specific beyond burning the dead standing wood that I can think of at the moment. I'm pretty certain that I'm now stood in front of a pedunculate or English oak. Now I could recall from memory that Quercus was some part of the scientific name, so I dug out the book and actually it's Quercus robur. So I was halfway there. Half cheated and half was from memory. What tells me that it's an pedunculate English oak is, and I find this easy when there's a comparison to make with a sessile oak, but I don't have a sessile oak to compare with. But if you look at the point, and I appreciate this is going to be hard to do, where the leaf joins the leaf stem. Get that damn thing to focus. There's hardly anything there. It's just a matter of millimetres between the leaf ending and the stem beginning. In fact, if you give it a quick glance, you almost kind of miss that there is something there. It almost looks like the leaf is just growing out of the main stem, and this secondary stem coming off there where my fingernail is. Again, it's really difficult for you to see, right in the sunlight as well. There's barely anything, just a matter of millimetres, and that tells me that it's a pedunculate or English oak and not a, let me just consult the book, let me just consult the good book, and not a sessile oak. Yeah, so behind me is a pedunculate or English oak. Bushcraft uses, I think they used to make bows out of them, or perhaps still do, but I'm not sure. What I am certain about, because I carried, felt like tons of this damn stuff up and down hills on the woodcrafter course, it is very good for burning, particularly if you want very hot, long-lasting embers to cook over, or for any other purpose. If you need long-lasting, hot burning embers, then an oak tree is a good tree to try and harvest some dead standing wood from. Well, I think this is the last tree, plant slash fungus species. I think this is number 10. It's either 9, 10 or 11, so I'm either bang on, I've exceeded my expectations, or I've just about failed to meet them, but I'm pretty sure that this is on or around number 10. I'm more certain that this is a sycamore tree, a member of the maple family, and the scientific name is Acer pseudoplatanus, or platardus. Acer pseudoplatanus, I think, is the scientific name. There's the leaf. It's the classic kind of Canadian maple leaf that you have on their flag. 5 lobes. This is a relatively young tree. It's very, very small, but there's lots of growth on it. And reading this particular book, it tells me that on younger trees, that stem there that you can see is normally a reddish scarlet colour, and it is. However, on more established older trees, that tends to be more of a green colour. So again, it is a young tree, and it does have, you may not be able to pick that up, you may, it does have a reddish, purpley, maroon tint to it. So that again, that matches as well. And of course, I've also managed to find some of those seedlings that we used to throw up in the air at school, and they used to whirl down like a helicopter. Another good recognition feature as well. This was the tree that kind of taught me that it doesn't always matter about being able to identify the particular species. It's more about being able to put it into the family. So you may recall a few seconds ago I said that this is a sycamore tree, part of the maple family. Yep, part of the maple family, the Acer family. What am I trying to say here? Sometimes it wouldn't matter if this was a sycamore behind me, or it was a, consulting the good book, a Norway maple, or a Montpellier maple, or a Cappadocian maple, or a sugar maple, or perhaps a red maple. The point is, it's in the maple, it's in the maple family. So therefore the qualities of it are likely to be very, very, very similar, if not identical. The ability to carve with a sycamore, part of the maple family, there's probably an equal ability to carve well with another member of the maple family as well. So it kind of taught me that being able to be bang on with the species isn't always important. Just being able to recognise it as part of that family, therefore it's likely to have that family's characteristics, is a stepping stone. You don't need to know the minutiae all the time, although clearly your idea will improve as a result of it. I just mentioned there about carving. I've carved several spoons or posh looking sticks using sycamore, so I found it very, very useful for doing that. So I think that was number 10. If you're counting at home, do let me know if I've missed one or if I've exceeded. On that note, that's the end of the video. A few key takeaways from me, for myself here, having undergone this exercise today. I can identify, I'm quite comfortable with the trees. As long as I'm looking up or level with my eye, I feel quite comfortable. The moment I look down at plants, I'm like, oh, I don't know what that is, I'll ignore it. I don't know what that is, I'll ignore it. There were far fewer plants that I saw that I thought, yes, I know that, let's record a video or part of the video about that. Yet most of the trees I looked at, I was able to identify them. So, and I've said this in previous videos, I need to look down more at what's on the ground in order to enhance my plant identification. And the other thing, and that possibly came across in this video, is whilst I can ID the trees, my knowledge about how they might be used is fairly scant. I either don't know how it could be used for bushcraft purposes, but I know it could, but I don't know how, or I just have one example. For example, just mentioned the sycamore, part of the maple family, good for carving. I'm sure it's good for other things. So what I'm going to do is, although I have my field notes from the tree and plant ID course, it's a big A4 folder, it's quite large. I don't really take it out with me that often. I do take this. So what I'm going to start to do is to transpose the bushcraft uses that are in my green folder into this book, so that more of the information is all in one place. And hopefully, as I'm IDing things, it's also sinking in as to what their bushcraft purposes are. Thank you for joining me today. It's the 29th of June, so we're halfway through the year. Here we go, folks. Thanks for joining me. If you enjoyed the video, please do give it a thumbs up. If there's any comments you've got, do you go out and identify trees and plants quite often? Do you set yourself a target? Do you lean more towards being good at trees or plants, or are you good at both? Or are you rubbish at both, like I was 18 months ago? Do let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, if you're not yet a subscriber, in this corner of the screen here is a small circular button. Click on that and you become a subscriber, and you won't miss out on any of my future videos. One last thing, I said this at the beginning, I'll say it at the end. This is not a how-to. This is not a definitive guide to. This is not an expert view on tree and plant ID. This was me coming out, still very much a student in this field, with some books, with some, hopefully, some retention up there in the old grey matter, trying to identify some trees and plants and put some uses to them. If I've got it wrong, I am sorry. It was never my intention to mislead you, but hopefully I've said enough times during this video, it's not really a teaching video. If I have got it wrong, do let me know in the comments below, politely of course. Let me know what it perhaps was, what ID features made it that, and any bushcraft uses as well. In fact, there's an idea. If you want to comment below, if there's something that I've mentioned today and I haven't mentioned that is a good use for this in the bushcraft world, why not drop that in the comments below? I've waffled on long enough. I need to get the hound back home because she's starting to get a little bit warm under the collar now. I'm going to get home and start to get this edited. Thanks for watching. Cheers.